Good timing. That's tremendous. Here we go, back again with the Business Not As Usual podcast. I am one half of your guides today. This
Your
is
mystic
Vince,
guide.
and with me, as always, my brother from another mother, Michael Martino. Michael,
Hey,
what's going on, buddy?
I'm excited today, Vince.
Why?
We have another special guest. We're like on a roll for guests this month.
Guest?
Yes. So on this episode, we're going to be talking about some of my favorite things. So I want to introduce everyone to, look at he's just shaking his head, to Lynn, who is the founder of Service Design Paths. We're going to be talking about all things service design, model office, coaching, and Lynn likes to talk about the 80s. So maybe we'll talk about that as well. We'll throw some of that in as well, like best songs from the 80s, or maybe she can regale us with her fashion from the 80s, which is always awesome. So welcome to the program, Lynn.
Welcome,
Thanks for having me. Awesome to be here.
So Lynn, we'll see. Again, we'll see if you think that at the end of this episode. But
Vince seems like he's looking for a fight again this episode. But
I'm actually not.
We'll
I'm in a tremendous mood, and so as a result, all of my, I don't want to say opposition, but all of my rancor towards service design versus the business analysis and the process stuff. It's it's just let's all get along. So you're probably not going to get a fight from me, unless I'm going to say more Mike. Unless you say something that pisses me off, then we'll throw down.
Yeah,
I was excited to get into it.
So Lynn, why don't you talk a little bit about service design, the work you do at Service Design Paths, and then I want to get into some of the work that I've worked with you on Model Office, which. Before you get to it, and my blog is not like, I get like onesies and twosies on when I do a blog post. I wrote a post called "What the Hell's a Model Office?" 3,000 people. So everyone, Lynn, is about the model office. So we have to make a note not to get too far down the path, because I want you to talk about the great work that you did. But why don't you talk about service design paths, all of that.
Yeah, for sure. So my kind of background, I'm a designer through and through, for good and bad. Started out in industrial design in my undergrad and have been doing various forms of design ever since. So UX and digital. And then in the last kind of chunk of my career, really focused on service design, customer experience. And for the last almost 3 years, I've been in independent consulting mode. Sort of actually exciting news, going through a little bit of a kind of rebrand of the business. So that should be launching shortly, but have been running service design paths and supporting organizations who have a service or a process or an experience that they want to make better. And, the $1 million question, what is service design? At its simplest, it's sort of using design-based methodologies and approaches and processes to try to make a service better.
So when we talk about service design, I think this is where, and the intersection with process, but you and I, Lynn, probably come from we have a lot of customer research, and then service design tries to solve that problem. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and then we can jump to Vince about how, from a process perspective, how he likes to solve problems, and we can get into that for a bit.
Yeah, totally. So service design definitely takes that kind of design-based methodology where you're doing a lot of upfront, typically qualitative research and discovery. You're trying to map out what's kind of going on. Again, typically qualitative, but ideally you are bringing in some quantitative, data, metrics, analysis, things like that. And then from there, you're basically moving into identifying what those opportunities are, where things really suck, where you want to make them better, and then going through that process of sort of ideating, coming up with ideas, prototyping them, and testing them. So that's sort of the brass tacks, I suppose. But I think you're right, Mike, in that it's very rooted in this kind of qualitative human experience, kind of design-based approach. And kind of, side note, I definitely think there's limitations to it. And I think one of them is actually compared to things like Lean or Six Sigma, is being really, really good at implementation and delivery. And I see Vince getting excited over there.
Oh my God. You like totally made his face, you totally made his day. Look at him.
I've got
tears.
I've got tears. I'm so happy to hear you say that. Please continue.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, you'll have to reel me in because I definitely can go off on this. But I mean, service design is my work. It's what I love. It's my people. But I'm also someone who has a lot of critique and criticisms and sees a lot of opportunities for, where the gaps are. And I think there's no one methodology or tool set or approach that's the be all end all, right? Like, you have to know the limitations of what you can bring, what your particular mindset and approach is good at, and where it's not that great. So I definitely think the big thing that I'm really actually trying to explore in a lot of my practice is the implementation aspect. Because I got really, really sick of doing service design work and basically handing over a PowerPoint at the end, right? Like, okay, important to have socialization, communication tools, not trying to undermine that. But at the end of the day, like, what we all really want is for things to actually change, for things to actually be better, to actually be delivering better services, experiences, and so on. So yeah, I'm sure we can kind of get into it more if you want.
Go
yeah,
Vince.
I mean, we definitely can. I mean, Mike, let for a second, let's take it back to the real old school here of how you and I originally connected on professional matters. Yeah, you're a good dude and you're nice to hang out with, but like on professional matters, it was this realization that, you coming from the customer side, you knew how to get the insights, but you didn't know what to do with them. And for me, coming from, so for Lynn, I'm a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. It's one of the many
that's why he was all happy,
arrows in my quiver, as it were.
Awesome. That is awesome.
And so I come at it from, I know how to solve the problem. I have a hard time drawing the insights from customers specifically. And so it was this like, man, we should work together on something and help each other out, because I agree. And your comment on disciplines and methodologies, you're not going to get a fight today. Cause like, I'm totally on board. You're right. Like, each discipline is perfect for solving the type of problem that it is designed to solve. So, like the age old agile argument, and like, agile doesn't work here. Well, if you're trying to apply agile in a context where it's not really meant to be applied, like agile is primarily for software development. It's not for process improvement. So you're not going to get the same results.
Yeah. I think there's a key word that you just said there, Vince, to me, which is context, right?
Yes.
Context is so important. And I mean, I see it all the time with design. People want the recipe, the playbook, the 4 steps or the 5 steps or the whatever. I see head nods, and that's great, and that's the starting point. But you have to be sensitive to the context with any of these methodologies, right? And it doesn't mean that there aren't principles that are broadly applicable or that can be useful, but then you do have to really adapt it to context, and have that, I think, continuous learning mindset about how do we tweak this for our context, how do we get better at this.
Right.
So I think, Vince, where the intersection is, and especially with the work we've done. So we have service designs, how we want a customer to go, like the way we want to treat customers, how they want to go through our organization to do a transaction or a whole bunch of things. And to Lynn's point, that's great. Where I see the process and Lean is, how do you make those things come to life? So they work in, like, there's a handshake there. There's not one does one thing and then that has to be that handshake. I think that's what the missing piece has been. That
right.
How on the process side are you making these journeys come to life from the service design work?
Right. And I would actually say probably the most recent disagreement that we've had on this subject is about which comes first.
Yes.
Right. And
So Lynn, which does come first?
Yeah.
Chicken and egg. I'm going to subvert the thing and say that I actually think my hypothesis is that they should be integrated, right? And that they should be in an ongoing and cross-functional way. Because I think that's actually where a lot of organizations is when you have any form of handoff. And you actually, and I think, again, a lot of organizations are trying to figure out how to do this in a way that works strengths, resources, but actually ideally you want people who really understand what it takes to implement involved in the I don't want to say the word upfront, but like in the exploration, in the development, in the design, right? But it's tough because when you get into services, you have so much complexity. You have so many, particularly at scale, you have so many different disciplines or silos or kind of pieces of an organization that need to come together. And that is like one thing I kind of will say that I think I'm excited about to see with service design. I do think one advantage is pushing organizations to sort of see things from the customer perspective, which of course is a perspective that navigates across channels, across organizational silos. And I think that's something that maybe kind of has been missing, right? It's sort of industrial management. We've built up all of these organizational silos and structures. And then we're like, why is it breaking? Why do I call in? And, I have to tell my story to the customer service agent who passes me off to the next person, and I have to tell the story over and over again, right? I think the customer experiences those breakdowns more so than maybe we do internally.
Yeah, because internally that's how we're structured. It makes sense, except it doesn't, and our customers don't care how we're structured. Like this is again one of those things that I try to instill in my Six Sigma students is like they don't care, so you need to look holistically at your process, at what you're trying to improve, and you also need to make sure that you're not what I call squeezing the balloon of pain by sending your problem upstream or downstream and making it someone else's problem. Like you can't, like those long like clown balloons, if you squeeze the middle, the air doesn't go anywhere. It just goes somewhere else, right? And so yeah, and like the customer doesn't care, and in the end it's about solving problems. It's about making things better. And I think that's where we are symbiotically we related, because I agree with your comment, we do need each other. And there's a point where it becomes almost cyclical, and it almost doesn't matter who went first. Like it doesn't. I think that comes later. And so again, my perspective is defining the need comes first. And so from a business analysis perspective, that is, what is the requirement, what is the need? Then you design the service to accommodate the need. And I know, Mike, you've taken the vice versa approach, and that's fine. In the end, it doesn't matter, because as you get rolling, eventually you are working in sort of synchronicity.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that like there's sort of this thing there's a couple things I want to say that are pet peeves of mine. And one is that often I see this in design programs and in teaching design, is that we sort of ask students to come up with things from scratch, design an app from scratch or whatever, right? And the reality for the vast majority of folks is that you're almost never starting from scratch unless you're truly building a startup from the ground up. So I think, Vince, to your point, very quickly, or actually almost most of the time, you're doing the whole, awful analogy, like building the airplane while flying it. Things are in process, things are in flight, and you have to be able to kind of come into that cycle and try to make things better. And the other thing I wanted to just call out, because this is a real pet peeve of mine, and I don't really know kind of why or where this has happened, but I do think something quite unfortunate in the way that design is being kind of talked about and practiced is that it's become very separated from implementation. And I think this is a little bit to do with kind of design thinking and the way these things have been sort of branded and sold and taught. But like, you know, to me, design was always about actually doing a thing. It was never just like thinking about doing a thing and then having someone else worry about how to actually do it. So I do think, you know, I want to push a little on, I think ideally design does have some implementation chops. Excuse me. Unfortunately, that isn't the norm right now. And I think we're also figuring out how to do that at scale.
Yeah, I think I just read one of my favorites, Seth Godin's new book, The Practice, which is different takes on stuff he's written before and the war of art. You're not an artist because you draw. You're an artist because you actually deliver that drawing to your customers. And I think that's what you're getting at, Lynn. It's service design is not just we do a whole bunch of things and then we give our grand presentation and we're like, on to the next one. Like that is not a service design until it's actually in practice. And unless you've actually operationalized it, it's not a service design. It's
totally. It's just it's like a figment of your imagination at that point, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah, I'm so happy right now. I'm so happy.
I love it. I mean, I think this is it's really tough, right? And this is actually one of my favorite topics. It's like, what are the outcomes of design? And I think one of the challenges that we're really facing is that a lot of the time designers are evaluating the outcomes. They're mixing up the outputs. So let's say something like a journey map with the outcomes, which is what we're talking about. Well, what's the service that's actually being delivered? What's the experience someone is actually having? And then the other thing that we're doing, and I'm guilty of this, is we're asking stakeholders and people in the organization to kind of assess and interpret the value of our work through those outputs. Right? Like we're putting journey maps in front of people and we're sort of saying like, didn't I do a good job? Right?
What do you think?
Right?
Look, what do you think?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm so enjoying this conversation because I say the same thing, but instead of using journey map, I use process map, right? What do you think of this process map? I mean, it looks fine.
Nice boxes,
but it's not
arrows.
Like it's not the process.
Yeah,
it's a visualization. It's a concept of what the process, how the process should flow.
Totally, and
it's not real.
Yeah, it's the like the map is not the territory, and I think it's
right.
You know, it's important to have these tools that help us to grapple with complexity, which I think is why we have such a proliferation of, you know, process map, journey maps, or like whatever, right? Because we're trying to kind of get our head around collectively what is actually going on, but it's so complex that you have to represent it in some way. But to your point, that's not actually the process.
It's not the work.
Right. It's sort of a stepping stone.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the one thing that I've kind of I know a couple of awesome process engineers. I think the thing that, you know, that discipline seems to be really great at is actually getting serious about measuring change. And that is a really great proxy for showing your outcomes. And that's very exciting to me, right? Because that's very powerful.
And I think just to segue into, you know, another topic of conversation, I think that's where you can take those journey maps, those process maps, and run them through a model office to see whether what made sense to you on a piece of paper actually translates in practice. Right?
And
like
before Lynn jumps in, I want to say this. So Lynn helped with standing up a model office. And not only was the work exceptional, what's more impressive is the coaching that she gave. The work just continues to get better and evolve, and which is the point of having someone like Lynn come in and help you, because when she goes away, can your team still keep doing those things? So that's just a shout out to Lynn. But yes, the model office is what I'm excited about, because you have these things that you've thought about, right? Maybe you've put constraints on it, maybe you haven't, you have hypothesis, and then it runs through this model office. So maybe Lynn, give us like what is a model office? Why is everyone so excited about it, and like the benefits of it?
Yeah, this is such a great topic. I love this because it's about the transition from those ideas on paper to making it real and to trying it out. Yeah, and there's so much I want to say here. So I guess fundamentally, model office is a way of prototyping or simulating, a service or an experience, and trying to actually make it real so that you can figure out where are the bits that just don't work the way we thought they would. What assumptions have we, what incorrect assumptions did we have? Which ones can we validate that we're on the right track with, and what do we need to change to make this work better? And it's so interesting, right? Because my kind of background and path is very, very rooted in design. And so as I understand it, and you folks can chime in and kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but model office kind of comes from a bit more of that IT kind of software discipline or perspective. Like I've been trying to do research on this and kind of figure out the roots of these things, because I always want to know, like, where does this come from? And then you have things like conference room piloting, which is also quite rooted, I think, in that kind of software development IT approach. And what was like so interesting to me was seeing this sort of naming of model office, which in my kind of world and in my language would be really this idea of prototyping a service and testing it, I should say, prototyping and testing, but doing that sort of in this really integrated way, which was so fascinating. In design, we kind of talk about, and this was like a real aha for me, the difference between imagine like prototyping. So that's like a storyboard or a future process map where you're kind of describing the thing, versus experience prototyping, where you can actually go and experience it in real time. And so model office starts to move us towards this experience prototyping, where we're not just sort of imagining how it's going to work theoretically on paper or in a storyboard, but we're going to actually try it.
Yeah. I think, and I've done a little bit of looking into this as well. I think it comes from manufacturing, right? Like you can have this, this is how the conveyor belt is going to move, and but that lip is a little bit too small, and now things are falling off. So you need to actually see it and experience it. Yeah. I've got a quick story to that point. And I think it'll illustrate that the difference between the concept and the actual practice. Several years ago, we went on a trip to Barcelona, and in the planning, lovely city, by the way, Barcelona, love it, would totally move there if I could. In the planning, we were looking at, okay, well, this is here and this stop is here, and it's only 2 kilometers. And then we'll go here, and then we'll have lunch here. And each stop was like, it's a kilometer, it's 2 kilometers, it's 3 kilometers, whatever. And as we're having the conversation, it's like, oh yeah, it's only 1 kilometer, no problem. When we actually had to walk it, and now it's becoming real, we bought a Metro Pass really quick, because it was like, you know what? First of all, it was hot. And if you've ever been in Spain in the summer, it's ridiculously hot. But it's like, why did we do this? Well, when we looked at the map, or when we were planning this out, you said it was fine. It was only 2 kilometers. Well, I'm an idiot, because this is ridiculous, and we're never doing this again. So, what made sense conceptually, once it was made real by actually having to walk, it was like, this is ridiculous. Just buy the pass and let's never do this again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one thing to talk about it and to think about it, but it's another to actually experience it and do it. And that's where I think there's also opportunities to continually refine and improve the process, and thereby the experience.
Yeah. 100%. And I think that part of what's happening, as we kind of transition to information and service-based economies, as technology accelerates all of that stuff, it's actually harder and harder to do a top-down planning and execution in the types of cycles that businesses and organizations are used to. So like the trip to Barcelona that you plan in your head is only sort of less and less likely to come to fruition in the kind of context that we're operating in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a really tough shift for organizations. Like one of the big questions that kind of came up for me on the model office work is like, can you have a culture of kind of prototyping and testing and simulating and sort of testing if you don't have this continuous learning mindset, if you don't have a culture of trying things and prototyping things, right? Like, because a lot of organizations are still quite rooted in that kind of top-down model, like we're going to think it up on paper and then we're going to deliver it. And there's not a lot of time or space in between to try things out, to fail, to learn, and to iterate. And I think that's the big kind of challenge that organizations are facing. And there's lots of great, like lean UX, and there's lots of people kind of writing about how do you do this? How do you embed that mindset of experimentation and continuous learning and make those loops tighter and more effective, so you're not waiting like 2 years to deliver the thing and then you're like, oh, no longer relevant.
Yeah, and that requires a big change, right? Because that's not how we currently plan. It's not how we do things. We do we build out our Gantt chart, our 3-year plan, and then but how do you know that that's what you're going to be talking about in January of 2023? Like, how can you possibly predict? You can't. Yeah.
Favorite tweet of all time.
I mean, you can, but it's ridiculous, right? Like,
favorite tweet of all time. I let Mike get in there after that, but it's like all Gantt charts are a design fiction. I firmly believe that. They're just
So I think risk adverse companies should be all over the model office, to be honest, because it takes away so much risk. And I've seen it over the last year and a half about if we would have done that without going through the model office, that would have been, even if we can't change something, we can actually get some tools to mitigate. Like if let's say that there's a runaway train, that's the date we got to go. At least we can get tools to mitigate. So for me, if you're a risk adverse organization, like model office is a must because it finds those unintended consequences. It finds things before you actually launch.
I couldn't agree more. And that's often the framing that's most appealing, right? Is risk mitigation. And I do find at the same time, there can still be barriers to adopting that mindset because it does require change in how things are done. And that can be scary, right? No one likes change,
No one likes change. No one likes change, but I think the 1 or 2 times you actually show it, then this is the best part. Risk averse, like no change. Oh, wow, that actually worked. Can we get that for these many things? Because before we couldn't get it for anything. Wait, those 2 things work. I want it then it becomes like that's just the hammer. We need to do it on everything, and then you're like, we can't. That's impossible. What it was meant for.
It's like then you go the other end of the pendulum swing where you're like, oh my gosh, let's not have this just like be a checkbox exercise, right? Like I've heard, organizations where now they have built-in requirements that every project has to have a journey map. And
and service design.
But I don't know, right? Which goes back to context. Is it contextually appropriate? Is it really the best use of your time and resources? So it's fascinating because it's a little bit like be careful what you wish for, right? On that early part, you're like, why don't people get this? Why don't they want to do it? There's so many barriers. It's really stressful. And then you come out that other side and people are jazzed and excited. They see the value. And then to your point, Mike, you're like, oh my gosh, okay, we can't do this for everything.
Right. You have like these 2 stresses that you like, oh, we'll never get enough work. How come people don't come to us? Oh no, we got too much work. Please stop coming to. It's like, it's just, there's that sweet spot seems to not be around in the world. It's just, you go from either one way or the other.
Which I think is where you kind of get into, kind of back to a little bit of what you said, like, how do you have this become, let's do a podcast title, like fun joke, but like, how do you have this become business as usual, right? How do you have this become so embedded in the mindsets and practices, and how do you equip people with the tools and skills that they need to bring these approaches into their work on an ongoing basis, so that then you don't need, or so that the role of centralized functions, like a centralized, let's say, model office, can do the more complex things or the higher value things, but that the sort of approach is embedded in how everyone is working.
Right.
Yeah, that democratization of knowledge, I think, is really unusual in a lot of organizations, because especially in like a service knowledge organization, knowledge is power. And so I don't want everybody to understand service design or Six Sigma or UX or like insert, discipline wherever. I don't want them to know, because if they know, I'm making myself replaceable. And I think that is a very short-sighted and it's a ridiculous perspective. But I think that's what's driving a lot of that behavior. And so you do end up fighting for this centralized like ownership or as you say, Mike, the fiefdom. Like it's mine. It's mine, and I'm the gatekeeper. And if you want it, you have to come to me.
Yeah.
Right.
It kind of makes me a bit sad. I would love if we could, be less focused on fiefdoms and just more focused on good outcomes. But I totally understand that it's the nature of people working together in organizations, and kind of, there's always going to be, I guess, small p politics. And but yeah, I'm a firm believer in like, give it away, just like, let's try to kind of one team, one dream, like we're all going after, generally speaking, the same outcomes. And but I know it's more complicated than that. That's just a little idealist speaking.
No, but I think that's good, right? Like I know, years ago, with a company that I was working with, my measure of success, and I told them this quite openly, and I don't know if they ever received it the way it was intended, but it was, I will be successful when you don't need me anymore. Because it means that the knowledge has permeated into the culture, into the organization.
Yeah.
And now you don't need me to do that. And that's, it's not that you can fire me and like, but now I'm now free to go do something else.
Yeah.
Right. I can go, try cooking or no.
Yeah.
But I can go try something else.
In Barcelona.
Because in Barcelona, right? Yes. Because I don't need to be that coach and that hammer for continuous improvement, because continuous improvement is just part of the DNA.
Yeah. I think this is where the work is really fascinating, because so quickly in my mind, it does become about organizational change, which is such a gnarly beast.
Yes, it is.
But I think it's really fascinating, because like so quickly you bump up against what are the fundamental operational and organizational models and mindsets that are driving what's happening. And it's really hard to organize effectively at scale, right?
Yeah. If you've listened to more than one episode of this podcast, you know that for us, like, everything comes back to culture.
Yes.
And so if the culture does not support what is that you're trying to do or the change that you're trying to bring, it will kill it.
Yeah.
And so the culture needs to support it, and then it has an opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. And so speaking of change, Lynn, what have you seen in the course of us being forced to all leave the office? Because service design is very, like, it was in a room, very close contact, and doing a lot of things where you're standing up and post-it notes and everybody was hovering over each other. How have you seen like that work change the industry? Like, what's your perspective during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right in that. I think a lot of service design has been heavily reliant on, in-person synchronous workshops and facilitation. And, I think there's been people who've been doing this remotely also. So I don't want to sort of make a broad generalization, but, certainly before the pandemic, I was regularly traveling to be on site with clients, and we would be convening cross-functional teams to really get together, to be in that room for 3 days to do whatever it was, workshop sessions, mapping, etc. So I do think one massive change has been having to do that type of collaboration fully remotely. And I think before the pandemic, I would have said, no way, there's no way you can get the same quality. For me, the jury's still out on what this is going to mean kind of long term. I think it's shown us that it is possible, and there are a lot of remote collaboration tools that can be used, and people are adapting. But I do think, and this goes back to our culture thing, that what we really lose is something about culture and trust and being able to read the social cues that we, as kind of biological beings that have evolved over many, many, hundreds
millennia
of years, are kind of attuned to pay attention to. So we really lose a lot of the cues and the trust building and the things that go a long way to creating the type of psychological safety and culture that enables us to do this work, that enables us to kind of face change together. And I think that's something that I'm curious to see how that plays out longer term, because I think that's really, really hard. Like, I really believe the fundamental unit of this work is the relationship. And so I am spending a lot of time and attention on the relationship with every single person I'm interacting with as best possible, and that's a lot harder remotely, I think. That's my take.
Yeah, but not impossible, right? I think
not impossible.
I think you just have to develop some other tactics and some other strategies. I can't wait until we have an opportunity to be back together. Yeah. I don't want to go back to the office 5 days a week, but I like having the option of getting into a workshop and just doing my thing. Right,
it's possible. You've led workshops and
I've led.
And you have like different activities, like
and you just have to think about it differently.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah. I think what you miss, though, for me, it's like the energy. This is maybe a little bit
the energy, yes.
Tricky, but it's like, it's much harder as a facilitator to read a room. It's much harder to like read the vibe. It's much harder to get that same sense of a team or a group of people or a single person when it's mediated by a screen. It's not impossible. Right. I think it's just different. And yeah, agreed. You just got to be really adept at kind of adapting your facilitation techniques, your activities, like all of that stuff. But the other thing, I was actually talking to someone about this yesterday. I think the other thing that starts to happen is, writing on a Post-it in a workshop, there's, very little learning curve, but adopting some of the more complex online collaboration tools, like things like Miro, Mural, etc., there's a much bigger learning curve. And so one of the things we were talking about is like, how do you account for that kind of time sink of when you need to onboarding everyone to these tools? And one of my things is like, use the tools people are using. People are on Microsoft, great. Let's work in spreadsheets and, docs, and like, don't force people to adopt new things if it's not necessary. But in some cases, you do really want those more visual collaboration tools. And then you get into this whole thing of like, okay, now we got to figure out how to get people comfortable with this thing before the work can even kind of start, right?
Yeah. I'm all for simpler is better. Offline, online, like the less you have that can create, like I don't want the media to be the barrier. 100%. I don't want and in the end, it's like, I'm trying to get a result. I'm trying to do something. And so what is the best way to do that? And it just takes some planning. And I mean, probably the best compliment was that, that was a great workshop. It was so seamless. And like, yeah, but you didn't see the 8 hours of thought that went into,
Yeah,
you
how
know,
we're gonna do
and
this.
okay, these are the stakeholders that are going to be in the room. This is how they interact with each other. This is, you know, positionally, like, are they supportive of this? Or like doing that that stakeholder mapping exercise.
Yeah.
Like you're not seeing that. It just, and so cool. I'm glad that, you know, to you it seems seamless, but there's a ton that goes on behind the scenes to make it look like that, and you feel it. And I would imagine with whether it's service design or process design or business analysis or whatever, like if you don't have a strong facilitator to lead that, things can go off the rails really quick.
Yeah, I actually think that's just a core skill set, right? Like actually most of what I'm doing is holding space for people to collaborate effectively and trying to do all that background work to make that, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% smooth or conflict free, but to actually think carefully about what's going to help accelerate us get to the outcomes that we want from this working session or whatever.
Absolutely.
100%. So Lynn, it's that time to talk about the 80s.
Yeah.
So
I forgot about that. Are we're going to do this? Okay.
Well,
okay.
We're putting it in before we sign off. But
okay.
Favorite musical genre?
Oh my god!
Hit us with it.
There's just like so many. I just don't even know where to start. I've been really into Latin freestyle, which is this really awesome, slightly niche kind of 80s style of music. I don't know if you share links, but I can share a link to like my favorite mixtape from a DJ called Chrissy Murderbot. Epic. I mean, I just love anything 80s. Like,
nice.
To me, the point of music is to make you happy, and the 80s had just the happiest, most outrageous, fun music that I know of. You know.
All right. Yeah.
I'm gonna go with. I think I was a little more angst filled. So recently, I've been listening to a lot of Echo and the Bunnymen, Psychedelic Furs, and Psychedelic Furs for. If you've watched The Wilds on Prime, brought back The Ghost in You, which was awesome. Such a great song. So that's what I've during COVID, I've been listening to a lot of that type of 80s music. So
love it. So good.
Vince, I don't think. Do you have anything from the 80s for us? He's like stretching.
I actually Googled 80s music, and it's not that that I'm like, you know, hey, I was around in the 80s. I'm aware of the 80s, but it wasn't. I don't know that I could pick a genre. I think there were just songs that, like, to me, are quintessentially 80s. So like I remember, and this is going to blend nerddoms for me, but I remember anticipating the release of Grand Theft Auto Vice City and hearing Flock of Seagulls. And like that instantly became one of my go-to 80s songs. Aha's Take on Me. The same year I went to Barcelona, when I went back to Madrid, when we flew back, I went to a bar that was called My Mother Was a Groupie. And
that was the name of the bar?
That was the name of the bar. My mother, but in Spanish. But it was My Mother Was a Groupie. And it was one of those bars that we just happened upon by accident. So if you told me to like map it out, I couldn't. But it was one of those bars that you always found your way to at the end of the night. It was down this alley. And what I loved was they played Much Music, like the old 80s Much Music videos with the Globe logo on the wall. So it was like, it felt like home. And I, you know, there was some stuff happening, and I remember doing an operatic version of Aha's Take on Me, another quintessential 80s tune for me. So like, to me, it's those moments of, and I've never shared that publicly, by the way. So I hope I don't regret that. But
you might.
But I have been described as the songbird of our generation. So like, to me it's like When Doves Cry. You know, well, I think this is Welcome to the Jungle. Like, it's those It's,
Very
late
it's
80s.
songs.
Yeah.
It's not genres. So
For me, it's also like
Awesome.
Flashdance and Footloose, those soundtracks.
yeah.
Those movies, like, I don't know, there was something about it, like just the exuberance, some of the
And
grit.
just those 80s
Bon
movies.
Jovi,
Bon
Like
Jovi.
Breakfast Club.
Bon Jovi and
Yeah.
I have the same birthday.
Do you?
I believe. I'm like, I need to fact check myself, but I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I just
like
learned that I have
Pretty
the
in
same
Pink,
birthday as
16
Harry
Candles.
Styles. So I guess
Awesome.
I guess that's I
That's
would
been
trade
awesome.
you if I could, but
So Lynn, where can people find you on the socials and websites?
Yeah, so the best place is Twitter. My handle is at Whitster, WITTSTER. It's an anagram of Twitters. That's very smart and cool. Not nerdy at all. So Twitter is a great place. You can look for me on LinkedIn as well, Lynn Vizard, a pretty easy name to find, like wizard, but with a V instead. And then, website stuff, as I mentioned, is actually kind of under construction. But I do also have a newsletter, Ask a Service Designer, that I would love folks to, either submit a question or sign up to. You can go to my Twitter, and I'll have a tweet there about that. And then I'll announce when all the sort of new website stuff is rolling out, and when you can dig a bit more to kind of practice and work and all of that, because it's under construction.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. This was great. You were awesome. I know I really enjoyed it, and and you made Vince cry. So what else can we leave today with?
I think that's probably let's leave on a high note. We're not going to get any better than that. So again, thank you, Lynn, for Mike and myself, Vince. This has been the Business Not As Usual podcast. We will catch you in the next one. See ya.